Machinery, types of machinery and design of engine rooms vary a lot between different ships, and the type of equipment and the vessel's operational tasks will determine what kind of daily checks and daily routines are required. This varies. Is it a vessel that is operational 24 hours a day, or is it only day work and the vessel is alongside unmanned at night? We're going to have a quick look at the daily procedures for a daily operation service vessel from the fish farming industry, which is idle at night. This vessel is equipped with two 200 kilowatt propulsion engines with an attached washing pump and hydraulics also attached to the main engines. Daily routines, you start out with switching on the master switches from the starting batteries, consumption battery and the distribution box to the different control panels and electrical distribution panels. On with that. If the starting battery is flat, then you have a possibility to connect the start and consumption batteries together so that you're able to use the consumption batteries for starting the main engines. You see here more main switches. On with all these. This lower there sends the current to the 24 volt distribution box, which on this vessel was in the chart house. You need to make sure that you have cooling water supply, open seacocks. If the ship is unmanned at night, these should definitely be closed at night. Check the coarse filters for impurities. Here we see the seacock open so that seawater can flow into the heat exchanger. This was the vessel that had a heat exchanger and thus had the seacocks that need to be opened. Okay, open that one. Check the coarse filter. If there's any impurities, seaweed, ropes that are sucked into it, may clog the coarse filter. Check it first. That's the first thing you check if you have problems with cooling. Okay, so that's check. Next is to check the coolant level in the engine's cooling system. The design of these varies, but normally the cooling water should be visible in an expansion tank on or near the engine. On this engine here, the cooling water level isn't really visible until the engine temperature rises. Then it starts showing in the expansion tank. This is not a good design. It should be visible at all times. So check that on this boat. That's a red tick because it's not really an optimal design. Next, you need to check oil levels, engine oil level before you're starting the engine, and the oil level should be between the upper and lower marks on the dipstick. So that's okay. In addition, you check the oil on the gearbox, and it varies a bit whether this should be checked with the engine running or not. So you need to check the manual for your gearbox to find out should the oil level be checked before you start it or after you start the engine. Anyway, the gearbox has its own lubricating oil. Next is checking belts typically at the front of the engine. There are transmission belts for dynamo, hydraulic pumps, water pumps, other types of equipment which draw their energy from the running main engine. You should check that belts are undamaged and tight enough. On this image here, you can see that one belt has jumped off and the other one is visibly damaged. So this is definitely not okay. You see here, one belt is jumped off and the other one is visibly damaged. So this is not okay, and these belts should definitely be changed before you start the engines. Okay, with these preparations in order, you can start engines on the control panel for the engine, in this case in the chart house. Start the engines. This boat had a stern gland that was water lubricated, so there's no need to check the greaser and twist the grease pump. You should always let the engine warm up a bit before departure so that it reaches operational temperature before you start loading the engines. Typically on modern engines, you will have an alarm that will trigger if there's any kind of faults with lubrication, battery charging, cooling, or any other operating parameters. So normally you should get an alarm if there's anything wrong with any of the parameters. Okay, so engine started. What you need to do then is disconnect, switch off shore power, and then disconnect the cable. You see here, switch fuse off for the shore power connection. Then you can disconnect the cable. You also need to start up and check that the steering gear works. So start the steering gear pump, take the wheel hard to starboard, hard to port, see that the rudder is operational. Starting, checking navigation equipment, nav lights, etc. All that needs to be done before you are able to depart. Underway, you need to monitor important operating parameters of the engine. So machinery control systems with gauges will allow you to monitor these parameters while the engines are running. And even though you will have an alarm or a warning if values vary from or exceed the acceptable range, it is smart to keep an eye on these values so that you can have an image of what are normal values. What is the normal lube oil pressure, lube oil temperature, cooling water temperature. So if you know what is normal, then it's easier for you to see if they start deviating from the normal values. For instance, if the cooling water temperature starts increasing gradually with no apparent cause, so you will have a better idea if this is happening. Charging voltage, you can see a 24 volt system here, so it's charging with 28 volts, so that sounds good. Cooling water temperature, 40 degrees centigrade, and this was where the engine had not properly heated up. Engine oil pressure and temperature. You should have an idea what are normal values here. As well as gearbox, oil pressure, and temperature. You should have gauges for all these.